Yeah.
Well, if it's okay, Professor Cole, maybe we'll turn to the question of unbelief, which is not unrelated, in part because sometimes war is set in the context of believers versus unbelievers, but also because your article on the question of Kafara is takes up the question of the late antique context of early Islam, which will be a theme of our discussion, I think, throughout today, including in the following article as well. So this is an article, friends, that was published in JAOS, the Journal of the American Oriental Society, entitled "Infidel or Paganos: The Polysemy of Kafara in the Quran." I think it may be available on your academia page. Is that right?
It's actually available at my academia page, but it's also free to download from the JAOS.
Okay.
They don't copyright things. So.
Terrific, terrific. Yes. So maybe we'll just start with sort of the background to this project, and people will remember that the Arabic, even if you don't study or know Arabic, that the Arabic word kuf is commonly interpreted as something like unbelief. And therefore, that's the noun, and therefore someone who is a kafir, guilty of kuf, is often translated, that term is often translated kafir as unbeliever, or, and this sounds even worse, at least I think in contemporary English, an infidel. And then correspondingly, people would say, oh, and the verb kafara means to disbelieve, maybe to misbelieve, usually to disbelieve. And these words have become, at least kafir, kufr as well, they've become almost English words. I mean, I see them on my Twitter or X all the time, sometimes from Muslims who will say things like, oh, this kafir said that, or so such and such. And sometimes from non-Muslims who will sort of embrace being a kafir and saying, yeah, I'm a kafir. I've heard one of our colleagues described by Muslims as the friendly kafir. So that's another kind of use of it, because this is someone who's known for being sympathetic to the sympathies, or rather the sentiments of Muslims. Okay, you contend with all of these definitions surrounding kafir, kufr, and kafara. How did you start thinking about this question? Why did you write an article on kufr?
Well, Gabriel, being a historian, I don't approach words as abstract entities. I always want to see them
right.
in their historical context.
Right.
And of course, they change in their meanings over time. So I wanted to think about what the late antique equivalent of al-kafirun would be.
Right. That being the plural, or one of the plural forms for kafir, kafirun.
The plural form of the progressive participle, or the deverbal noun. And it seemed to me that you thought about it in Greek. I think it would be the kufr would be asabiya, a lack of proper awe towards God. And in
Can
Latin,
you say that Greek word again, Fresico?
Asabiya.
Okay.
And the Latin, it seemed to me, El Kafirun were the pagans, with Paganos. And then I really started thinking that there's something to this. So here's the thing. When we talk about these words, let's be linguists for a second.
Okay.
Because linguists have categories for words, which are very useful in analyzing them. Linguists make a distinction between verbs and nouns. I think a lot of us don't. We think if a verb means something and there's a deverbal noun from it, therefore it means the same thing. But linguists are aware that the deverbal nouns actually evolve often away from their meaning of the verb. And one of the ways that can happen is if people are bilingual and there's another similar noun in the other language they know, and so it gets assimilated.
Mm-hmm.
which is called a loan shift. So I am arguing that, first of all, there are two verbs at stake here. There's kafara, which is not a transitive verb. It doesn't take an object.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kafara b.
Kafara b with the preposition.
With the preposition,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, the preposition does take an object.
Right.
Kafara b always means to reject.
Okay. Okay.
Kafara only sometimes means that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say maybe even rarely.
Okay.
If you look at the words that are around the verb kafara in the Quran, there are things like rebellion, disrespect,
Mm-hmm.
I would argue blasphemy,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. That it has a wide range of meanings, and linguists call this polysemy, when a word can mean lots of different things. So I'm arguing that people have misunderstood kafara to be the same as kafara b. That they have misunderstood. This is called a phrasal verb, when you have a preposition with it that helps to determine its meaning, and it's idiosyncratic phrasal verb, which we have a lot of in English. Like
I think you use the example to get up as opposed to
yes, I get myself a sandwich, but I get up in the morning.
Right. Right.
The preposition makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So people have been reading kafara as though it's kafara b.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a mistake. And if you look at all the ways the Quran uses kafara, it doesn't always mean to reject.
To me, this is a really intriguing bit. It might seem at first as though it's a small observation, but actually it's consequential, especially when you take into account your argument that Paganos is related here. And maybe you could just introduce us a bit to the breadth or the semantic range of the Latin term Paganos.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of theories about how it developed, but its initial connotation seems to have been rural people, or people who are outside the center of the city.
Country bumpkins.
Country bumpkins. And that went on being one of its contextual meanings for a long time. And the Christians used to make fun of the Roman aristocracy, who remained pagans, that they were country bumpkins in a way, even though they thought of themselves as sophisticated city people because of their pagan beliefs. They were joined with the rural villagers. But then because I think city people adopted Christianity earlier and at a greater rate than the rural areas, it came to have a connotation also of believing in the old gods.
Mm-hmm.
So it had both meanings. And here's the thing. There's a verse in the Quran that says when the rains come and things turn green, the Kufar get happy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're rural folk.
Mm-hmm.
They're peasantry.
And hopefully I'm not going too quickly here, so you can slow me down or add another point. But now it seems like a good time to note the argument you make that the kafirun, the Quranic kafirun, that is that if you permit me, the unbelievers in the Quranic context, or maybe better, the opponents of the believing community in the Quran, you speak of them not simply as Meccan polytheists connected to the the historical idolatry that was distinctive to the city of Mecca, but as, quote, a provincial survival of Greco-Nabataean religion. So, I mean, could you explain that a bit? Is this a way of emphasizing the connection between classical pagans and the kafirun in the Quran?
Well, of course, it's a little bit speculative, but I think there were lots of different kinds of what we would now call pagans in the Hijaz, mm-hmm. as there were still in the Levant, which John of Ephesus talks about even as late as the 560s, 570s. There were still pagans in the Levant, and so the different kinds. I think there's a difference between pastoralist or Bedouin pagans and the urban ones. And the urban ones, from what the Quran says, I think, the urban ones had a genealogy in Nabataean religion. The archaeology also seems to support this. So the Nabataeans, who ruled a kingdom that included both what we would now call Jordan and the northern Hijaz, their religious beliefs have been excavated by scholars like Healy. And those goddesses mentioned in the Quran, Alat, and the great goddess, and Al-Uzza, and Manat, all of those are mentioned in the Nabataean inscriptions. They aren't mentioned together.
Right, right.
And then in the Quran, it's at least implied that people thought that they were the daughters of Allah, the daughters of the great God. Again, there's nothing like that in the inscriptions. There is one inscription that Ahmad of Jalad, the great epigraphist and archaeologist, has found that depicts Alat as the daughter of the star god Rodal, but not of Allah. So we know that in pre-literate pagan societies, these mythical relationships can change, and sometimes quite rapidly. But then the Nabataeans were conquered by the Romans in 106, and the Eastern Roman Empire was ruled in Greek. And so, and people, I think there's some evidence of Greek still being an urban standard in Levant among many people. So these Nabataean deities were associated with Greek counterparts from Mount Olympus. And Alat was associated, I think, quite frequently with Athena. And Al-Uzza was associated with Aphrodite. And you find some mentions of this in some of the church fathers and the stylites. And Manat was identified with Tyche or Fortuna, with the goddess of fortune and chance. So these were not absolute identifications. They shifted. Sometimes the goddesses were paired in different ways. But on the whole, that was the way it was. Now, I mean, it just, again, it's a little speculative, but Athena was the daughter of Zeus, emerged from his brain. So it seems to me that it could be looking at Hellenistic Greek, or Hellenic, I mean to say, Greek influence on the evolution of Nabataean belief. And the archaeologist and epigrapher Leila Nehmeh has been doing work in the Hijr area, Down Salt Land and so forth. And she has a very recent article in which she says that she stops finding mention of many of the Nabataean gods in the 4th, 5th centuries, except for these 4. She keeps finding mentions of Allah and Alat and Al-Uzza and Manat.
Interesting.
Which is very interesting. Because this is just north of the place where Muhammad was, and those are exactly the 4 that still show up in the Quran. So it seems as though people who worshipped according to the Nabataean way in the Hijaz, with this genealogy and Nabataean religion, probably more urban people, had a narrowing of their
pantheon.
That's right. And then by the time you get to the 6th century, the 500s, archaeologists aren't finding any inscriptions to anyone but Allah.
Right. Yeah, so, Ahmed Jalad on this channel has spoken about a sort of revolution before the revolution of Islam, which is the disappearance of the polytheistic inscriptions in and the appearance of the Paleo-Arabic monotheistic inscriptions.
So Patricia Crone suggested that the background of Quranic paganism was to some extent henotheistic, the idea that there was a great God with lesser deities below him, maybe even angels. I have a little bit of a dispute with the late Patricia, but on the whole, I think she's probably about right about this, and that the archaeology is supporting some of that. So that's what I meant. That when the Quran is saying to the Kafirun, you worship what you worship, but you're not worshiping the same thing as I'm worshiping.
In Surah Al-Kafirun,
in Surah Najm, or in Surah Al-Kafirun. I mean to say, what I'm saying is a reference to the Surah Najm depiction of these people as still having these lesser deities, the goddesses that they insist on worshiping alongside God. And I think that's only one of the strains of paganism that were there. I think the pagans probably had a very different way of approaching things and different gods. So the Quran at one point says, don't bow down to the sun and the moon. We know that there were sun and moon goddesses that were worshipped in the Hijaz. Maybe the Bedouin were still worshiping them. So that's what I meant by that. I think not only can we say that al-Kafirun as a term probably is best translated as pagans, but then there are different kinds of Kafirun. Maybe the mushrikun, which is another word, is associating deities with God. I toy with the idea that maybe they're the Bedouins who have a bigger pantheon, and for whom gods are more interchangeable. But in any case, one of my arguments is that the noun al-Kafirun always and only refers to pagans. That there's
let me just mention, can I jump in here, Professor Cole, just to mention an argument that I found very convincing about the larger question of what a kafir is when you refer to the description of the devil as min al-kafirin, so one of the kafirun. And you rightly, in my opinion, point out that the devil in no way is a polytheist, recognizes the sovereignty of God, of course, according to the different accounts. When he is set out of the Quranic paradise, a sort of pact or arrangement, he makes a sort of pact or arrangement with God and receives God's permission to go ahead and attempt to tempt and mislead God's creatures. But in any case, he's not a polytheist, but he is one of the kafirun. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that shows you that kafirun cannot be limited to a definition just a polytheist. There must be something else there.
Well, that's right. Again, I argue that there's a polysemy at work with this verb kafara and with the noun
because of ingratitude, because kuf can also refer to ingratitude, or
it has connotations of ingratitude, which of course shows up in the Aramaic cognate, and it also has connotations of covering things up.
You cover that in depth.
Of course, ingratitude is in a way covering up the favor that was done to you. Right. So, but what I'm arguing is that as the word is used in the Quran, the plural al-Kafirun refers to pagans, and it's never used to refer to Jews or Christians.
So I wanted to get to that before we move on to the other article here on Quranic punishments for adultery. But the Quran, as you note, and for anyone who hasn't read the article, this is not just someone making arguments without backing them up. I mean, it's really in-depth discussion, engaging with Islamic tradition and late antique texts in various languages, including Latin and Greek. And you don't really miss. You anticipate possible counter arguments. So one of them is, wait a second. The Quran does use this phrase, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ, in regard to things which Christians say, or things that are close to things Christians say. So classically in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Quran 5, verse 72, the Quran says, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْمَسِيحُ بْنُ مَرْيَمَ. Those who have said God is Christ, the son of Mary, have kafara. So how do you work that out? How are they not min al-kafirun? Oh, sorry, min al-kafirin, but they did kafara?
Well, because the noun and the verb are distinct. And there's the linguists say that when a noun migrates a bit away from the verb, that's a form of idiosyncratic polysemy. And so I think, words have contexts, and the verb isn't exactly like the noun. Whereas al-kafirun, I think, always is used in the Quran to refer to a concrete sociological group.
Okay.
The verb is much more elastic and has wide implications. And also the verbal noun kufar is like that. So I just say that, there's a verse in the Quran which traditionally has been thought to be talking about the Battle of Uhud, the second major battle fought with the Meccans, in which there were some Muslims who didn't go out to fight, stayed in Medina. And they apologized to the Prophet. They said, well, if we had known how to fight, we would have gone to fight. We're civilians. We don't even know how to do that. So we were all civilians, it was not a good excuse. And the Quran says, on that day, they were closer to kufr than to iman. They were closer
to belief, yes,
to whatever kufr is than to belief. These are Muslims.
Yes.
Okay, so and I compare it to a word like sin and sinner. Like if somebody was a preacher from a monotheistic community, they would say, well, our congregation are the faithful, and those people who are outsiders and don't accept salvation from our source are sinners, right? But that isn't to say that somebody in the congregation hasn't hooked up with somebody else's wife and so are committing a sin. The faithful can commit sins as well, but they don't belong to the sociological category of the non-believers or sinners. So I think the verb kafara is like that. It's something that a monotheist can do. They can just go in the wrong direction, including Muslims. So it's not a sociological category, it's an action. So I think that's because al-kafirun has undergone this evolution towards idiosyncratic polysemy, that it has come to mean a group of pagans. So in the same way, there's a group that are called Alladhina Kafirun and Ahlul Kitab, the people who have committed kufr from among the people of the book. But I argue that underpins my point.
Right, because it shows only some of them have done the kafara. Others have not.
If they were all kafirun, then you wouldn't need to make this distinction. So only some of them.
Yes.
Exactly. And I also suspect that if you look at where this kind of diction occurs in the Quran, that it's a political category and not a theological one.